So my topic today is about how technology can empower students. I will also talk about how the lack of technology can put students at a disadvantage. I want you to understand that when I'm talking about technology, I'm not just talking about hardware. I'm also talking about the process of using software to grow and acquire knowledge with technology. So it's not just the hardware, but it's also the software that's going to be important for this conversation. But given that we are on the heels of Martin Luther King Day, and I hope all of you did a little bit of Martin Luther King Day celebrations, what would be Dr. King's 87th birthday, if he were still alive, he would have turned 87 on Sunday. I want to talk briefly about how media, which falls under the umbrella of technology, has helped empower people of color and inform the world about the injustices inflicted on Black people in the 1950s and the 60s. During the civil rights marches, sit-ins, bus boycotts, and etc., many people, both Black and white, were sprayed with fire hydrant hoses, beaten with police bully sticks, bitten by police dogs, and heckled by white onlookers. The use of media, meaning the newspaper and television, enabled people in some cities, states, the country, and the world to see these injustices that Black people were experiencing. And it also helped to unify Black people in a way that they had never been unified before. According to an April 5th, 1987 Los Angeles Times article titled "Journalists Discuss Coverage of Movement," newspapers and television brought the civil rights conflict into American living rooms and dinner conversations in dramatic fashions. Scenes of Blacks in Birmingham, Alabama, being attacked by police with dogs and fire hoses, and of voting marchers being bludgeoned and tear gassed by state troopers and sheriff deputies in Selma, Alabama, have become indelible symbols of those years. And you can still find those images in YouTube and various Google searches and in various history books as well. The article goes on to say that the civil rights movement would have been like a bird without wings if it hadn't been for the news media, said Representative John Lewis, who led the Bloody Sunday March in Selma in 1965 and was hospitalized with a fractured skull. So when the world saw those kinds of injustices being inflicted, they stood up and said, it's got to stop. And that would not have happened in the way that it did had it not been for television and the newspaper. According to the Paley Center for Media, by 1960, 90% of American homes had television. That's a long time ago, isn't it? All of you grew up with television. Some of us didn't quite grow up with it, but some of us did. So anyway, television became a catalyst for change on a massive scale. People in the northern states could see what was happening in Selma, Birmingham, Memphis, and vice versa. In addition, television helped Southern Blacks unify, for while local Southern media rarely covered news involving racial issues, they now had access to national newscasts that were witnessing and documenting this revolution. Television and newspaper helped to bring a form of equity that did not exist before. It helped to level the playing field by exposing the injustices that existed, and it forced change. While televisions in homes were informing and empowering people in the 60s, it was placed in schools to inform and empower students. For example, as a young girl, now I'm dating myself, in the Detroit Public Schools, I and my classmates learned to speak some Spanish from a woman on the television. Imagine that. At the time, I did not know that this was part of an investigative study, but it was, and according to Dr. Dorothy Florence Patterson, via her dissertation, it says, although it was not possible to have controlled classes during the experimental period and no true scientific data was available, the empirical evidence gathered indicated that children did learn to speak and understand Spanish when it was taught by the team of television and classroom teachers following the principles of foreign language in elementary schools. That woman on the television leveled the playing field for all of us learning Spanish. It is highly unlikely that all schools in the Detroit public system, even back then in the 60s, were learning foreign languages. And learning Spanish gave us a leg up. So that's another way that technology has helped to level the playing field. As all of you are aware, there are many forms of technology that have been and are being used in public and private schools and in higher ed, like here at Eastern. There are many studies that suggest that technology has many benefits that influence student learning. Likewise, there are studies that say that it doesn't. But even the studies that say that it isn't beneficial or as beneficial as we might want it to be, they don't advocate removing technology from schools. So let me ask you a question. How many of you have jobs that require you to use some type of hardware, including computers or laptops, computerized cash registers, laptops, software such as the internet, or to complete online forms? Just by a show of hands, how many of you in here? So most of you. So if technology was not in schools, many of you would be at a disadvantage. Because when you get jobs, as you see now, you have to be comfortable using some form of technology. So technology is helping to level the playing field for you in here today. Technology, including computers, laptops, tablets, digital cameras, document cameras, smart boards, and probes are amongst the commonly used forms of technology in many educational settings. Likewise, schools use the internet to locate information, communicate and collaborate with other students and subject matter experts, write blogs, write wikis, create websites, use simulations, participate in MOOCs, and play and create games. So as you can see, technology can be used to accomplish a myriad of tasks to support the growth and acquisition of knowledge. The concern that I have is that not all schools or colleges have access to a vast amount of technology. In some cases, there may be computers in the K-12 classroom, but they don't work, or they're not enough for each student to work one-on-one. And collaboration and rotation schedules can be used, and we teach our students in our learning technology and design program to do rotation schedules and have students collaborate, and that does help. But what about the classrooms that have all that technology in there and they're just dust collectors? They're not being used for anything. That's a problem. So there are many reasons why students don't have access to technology. The biggest one, of course, is lack of funding. Unfortunately, funding is lacking for technology in some school districts, and while some suggest that teachers attempt to get grants or encourage administrators to raise funds or persuade legislators to give more money, the fact of the matter is these solutions often don't bear fruit. Many teachers will tell you that they have tried to raise funds to get technology. Some are successful, most are not. According to a study by Sachs and others, the average student enters college with considerable computer proficiency. So let me ask you, how many of you, just by a show of hands, were comfortable using computers when you came here? Okay, so pretty much all of you. This study was written in 2001, so we're now in we'll say most of you might have, well, I'm not gonna say most of you, you're now in 2017 and you're in college, okay. All right, so Dr. Copeland and I collected data in 2015, and the data that we collected indicated that EMU students, like yourself, come to college feeling as if they are adequately prepared to use technology in their college courses. And many of those same students used technology in high school. Some did not. The use of technology in high school helps students to be self-directed. It gives students opportunities to explore and discover knowledge and skills while engaging them in critical thinking. The use of technology helps to level the playing field. Additional research by Sachs and others suggests that the type of high school attended influences the students' frequency of using electronic mail and the internet. They go on to say, further, While access to computers and the internet has grown markedly across all racial, ethnic categories in recent years, such access varies widely by race, with the lowest levels of computer ownership and internet usage exhibited among members of the African American and Hispanic community. Such differences in access persist even when income differentials are controlled. So what I would like to do now is to just have an informal survey to see what the demographics are here amongst those of you that are present, okay? So what I'm gonna, well first, you should have gotten a yellow and a blue postcard. Does everybody have that? So if you have a, let's see, I want you to take, okay. If you have a blue postcard, we're going to say that that means that you went to an urban school, you attended a school in an urban district. If you have a yellow postcard, you're going to say that you attended a school in an urban district. So, I know you have them both, but you're only going to use one, okay? So I'm going to define for you what urban and rural districts are, and then I'm going to have you go to the sides, and I'll explain all of that in a minute. Urban cities are large cities, often known as the core city, and they have 50,000 or more people in them. Cities in Michigan include Detroit, Grand Rapids, Warren, Ann Arbor. Some of you may be surprised to hear that about Ann Arbor, but Ann Arbor is considered an urban city. In Ohio, it includes Toledo, Columbus, and Cincinnati. Rural cities are any population, housing, or territory that's not in an urban territory. So it's generally a population of less than 50,000 people. And in Michigan, that includes Ypsilanti, Southfield, Oak Park, and Jackson. In Ohio, it includes Perrysville, Lima, and Bowling Green. So I want you, based on that definition, to pick the card that is appropriate for you. If you're not sure, there are people, those people who have the list of school districts in Michigan, would you, okay, right, just stand up, then they can see you. If you're not sure whether your school would be considered urban or rural, they can tell you. Now, if you, I can't see the signs, that number 2 over there, can somebody read to me what it says? Okay, if you went to a public school or a charter school, I want you to go over to that side of the room. If you went to a private school or were homeschooled, I want you to go to that side of the room. Okay, so clearly the public and the charter schools outnumber the private and the homeschoolers, but that's okay. I'm going to ask you some questions about when you were in high school, which type of technology you used. So remember, yellow would be urban schools like Detroit, and rural would be blue like Ypsilanti, okay? So, when you were in high school, did you use a computer? Raise your hand if you used a computer. No, raise your card, I'm sorry. Okay, so most people did, all righty. If you were in high school, did you use the internet? Okay, rural. Okay, so mostly the rural schools are winning out. When you were in high school, did you use a smartphone? Okay. How about an iPod or some other MP3 player? Okay. What about a laptop computer? Okay. A video game? Okay. A digital camera? This is amazing. And what about an iPad or some other tablet? Okay. And what about scientific probes? Scientific probes where you could test the soil or the quality of water? Okay. Now this is my last one. How about calculators? Okay. All right. So you can have a seat. But what this has shown is that the majority of the people went to public school, went to were in a rural setting, and they were the students who used the most technology. The students that went to schools in urban environments used the least amount of technology. So that's just a sample of you, an unscientific sample of your experience as students in high school. So it kind of mirrors the study that I spoke about a moment ago. Let me share with you what I know about how technology has been used in local elementary schools. While recently working on a grant to support teachers in using online GIS to teach U.S. history, I had the wonderful opportunity to visit schools in various cities around Southeast Michigan. I was able to see what technology they had in the class, whether they were using the technology to use the online GIS system, or whether they were passive users of technology. When I talk about being a passive user of technology, what I'm saying is that the teacher is the one using the technology, and you, as the student, are really just sitting there watching it, okay? So keep that in mind as I tell you what I found out. I visited schools in Grosse Pointe, Grosse Ile, Northfield, Farmington, Westland, and Wyandotte. All had computers for each student to use. In many cases, the students were engaged in problem-solving tasks that required them to use the online GIS software and other online resources to solve problems that related to U.S. geographic history. I visited schools in Detroit and Dearborn that did not have one-to-one technology access. In one school, only the teacher had a laptop and a smartboard. She allowed the students to come up to the smartboard and point out geographic information and read what was on the board. Most of the students were not engaged in the topic. In another school in Detroit, there were 4 computers in the back of the room along the wall, and the teacher had a laptop and a smartboard. In this class, the students did not use the technology at all. They were passive users. They watched the teacher use the technology. With the school in Dearborn, there were enough laptops for students to work in pairs. So they collaborated and problem solved, and this way they were able to work on their U.S. geographic problems by using the internet. The students who had one-to-one access were collaborating, problem solving, delegating tasks to one another, and they were generally engaged in the classwork and getting it done. Most of the students in those schools were white or Asian. These students will have an advantage when they arrive at places like EMU. So technology is leveling the playing field for them, but not for the students in Detroit and Dearborn that did not have access to it. When they come to college or at EMU or any other university, or it could even be a community college, they won't have that advantage. They will not have had the fortune of having technology level the playing field for them. So let's talk a little bit more about those other students and the students who worked in pairs. The students working in pairs had the advantage of collaborating and problem solving for about 15 minutes on the internet. But the students who had no access to technology other than to watch the teacher had no advantage. They weren't even collaborating with each other. The students in Dearborn were a diverse group of students. A few were of Arab descent, a couple were African American, and the majority were white. The majority of the students in the schools in Detroit were African American, with a couple Latino students and a few white students. So as I mentioned earlier, the use of technology in high school helps students to be self-directed. As college students, you need to be self-directed so that you can get answers to your questions. By being self-directed, you know that you can go onto, for example, the EMU website, and you can register to meet with an advisor. You can see the program of studies for the programs that you're interested in. You can get on Skype and talk to subject matter experts. You can get research to help you do your assignments. You can use that self-directedness, that self-motivation to help you to be successful. It helps to level the playing field for you. Students that don't have that aren't able to do that because they don't have the experience and sometimes don't have the fortitude to be able to take the initiative to use the technology in the way that most of you probably do use it now and have used it then. So about 15 to 20 years ago, the digital divide largely meant that people of color were without access to technology. That still exists, but it's also a difference now based on social economics. If your school has money, no matter whether you're in an urban or a rural district, you are more likely to have a lot of technology. That technology will help you to level the playing field, to be more marketable, because I'm sure all of you plan to graduate and get jobs, right? Well, some of you may go on to grad school, but how many of you plan on working right out of college? A good number of you. And those of you that are going on to grad school, you will eventually get a job. So having this advantage is good for you. It's very good. And those of you who think you might want to go on to grad school to get a master's or a doctorate, the use of technology is going to be invaluable. When you have to do your research, and some of you may have done some research now, having technology to collect and analyze that data is invaluable. And I can tell you that because I know that when I first started on my master's degree, there wasn't a whole lot of technology going around. And when we had assignments where we had to do surveys and things, I had to do it by hand or with a little calculator. But when you have the advantage of letting the computer, take that information, you can just run with it. You can do all kinds of configurations, and you have an advantage. So, what do people say we're supposed to do about it? First of all, I want to say that I believe strongly that to level the playing field, all students need access to technology. Not just to the computer or laptop to get to the internet, but a diverse amount of technology. Smartphones, you can do all kinds of things with your smartphones. And actually, if we had been able to use technology tonight, I was going to have you do some things, but I couldn't use it. But we could. With technology, just with your smartphone, you can have conversations with subject matter experts. You can watch instructional videos. You can email people to get information. You can go to the EMU library database and locate articles of value to you. You can take tests. You can do surveys. You can do polls. Oh boy. You can do your online coursework. It's a number of things you can do just with your phone, just your phone. But surprisingly, not everybody has a smartphone, but those who do have an advantage. So I think that all students should have access to technology, a myriad of types of technology. But the question is, how do we make that happen? Well, the U.S. Department of Education Office of Educational Technology recommends that schools form partnerships with regional businesses to purchase technology, also to refurbish, upgrade, and reuse technology donated from businesses, and to allow students to bring in their own technology. How many of you went to a high school where you could bring in your own technology and use it? Okay, good. Okay. Alrighty, so in closing, I'm going to say that I agree with each one of these suggestions, but I know that they are more easily said than done and will require considerable advocacy. So my challenge to each of you is to be advocates to bring technology into whatever educational setting you, your children, your friends, your family, whomever might be in, because it gives them an advantage, which is only going to serve to help them to be successful in life. So when you leave here today, I want you to think about what you can do to help make sure that there is more technology. Even here at Eastern, you might have a class where you see that there's no technology in there, but there might be ways that having technology might improve your experience in the classroom. Be an advocate for that. Talk to somebody, find out why it's not there, and do what you can to make it happen. Go back to your high schools, even your elementary schools, and advocate for those students, because those students will someday, hopefully, be like you coming to college. And you want to make sure that they have the advantage of using technology to help level the playing field. And so with that, I want to thank you all for coming and listening to me.